The Texas sun rose over the sprawling campus of Crestwood Academy, bathing the prestigious school in a golden glow. Known as a haven for the elite, the gates were lined with gleaming sports cars as students in crisp uniforms stepped out, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement and designer backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders. Among them, 13-year-old Daniel Brooks stood out, not because he fit in, but because he didn't. No luxury car dropped him off. Instead, he arrived in a plain t-shirt, worn jeans, and muddy boots, the evidence of a morning spent laboring on his family's farm. His old backpack hung heavy on his shoulders, and his hands bore the rough calluses of hard work. Daniel walked through the hallways, feeling the weight of judgmental stares. Whispers followed him like shadows. "Look at those boots, disgusting. Does he really think he belongs here? Why'd they even let him in?" He kept his head down, pretending not to hear, but the words stung all the same. Then a foot jutted out, blocking his path. He stopped short, facing a group of students led by Lucas Hayes, a blond boy with piercing green eyes and a smirk that oozed entitlement. Lucas, the son of a tech tycoon, had never known a day without privilege. Tilting his head, he sneered, well, who's this? A farmhand lost in our world?" Laughter erupted from the group, sharp and biting. Another boy, Owen, crossed his arms and glanced at Daniel's boots. "Probably rushed over after feeding the pigs, huh?" Daniel pressed his lips together, fighting the urge to snap back. He knew confronting Lucas would only fuel their fire, but Lucas leaned closer, his voice low and taunting. "Up with the chickens this morning, farm boy?" The laughter grew louder, drawing more eyes. Daniel tightened his grip on his backpack straps, took a steadying breath, and stepped around them. Lucas didn't like that. "Hey, I didn't say you could leave." A hand shoved Daniel's shoulder hard. He stumbled but caught himself, turning to meet Lucas's gaze, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that silenced the laughter. The tension hung thick until the bell rang, and Daniel walked away, heading to history class, unaware that a worse ordeal awaited. In the classroom, Daniel slipped into his usual seat at the back, a spot where he could fade into the shadows. The front rows were filled with the city's golden children, kids who'd never lifted anything heavier than a textbook. To them, Daniel was an oddity, something lesser. The door swung open, and Ms. Hargrove strode in, her heels clicking with authority. She carried herself like a queen, her cold gray eyes scanning the room, her stiff posture demanding obedience. Daniel knew her type. She judged worth by lineage, and she'd never hidden her disdain for him. Placing her notes on the desk, Ms. Hargrove adjusted her glasses and announced, "Today we're discussing the American Civil War." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. Her gaze landed on Daniel, lingering too long. Then with a tone laced with mockery, she called, "Daniel Brooks." He tensed, a chill creeping up his spine. This wasn't new. She loved singling him out. What was this war about? All eyes turned to him, the room growing still. His heart pounded as he fumbled with his notebook, searching for words. He knew the answer, but the morning's taunts had scrambled his thoughts. Before he could speak, Ms. Hargrove cut in with a dry laugh. "Oh, right, maybe history's not for you. Your kin probably never bothered with it, did they?" The class froze, then erupted in laughter. Lucas, up front, smirked triumphantly. Daniel's face burned, his throat tightening. Ms. Hargrove stood there, arms crossed, her expression unapologetic. He clenched his fists under the desk, rage simmering inside. He wanted to shout that he knew history, knew it better than most, that his ancestors had fought for their freedom, but he swallowed it down. Speaking out would only prove their point, give them more ammunition to label him out of place, so he stayed silent, the fire within him growing hotter. Then something snapped. He stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, cutting through the jeers. "What are you saying?" His voice was steady, but his eyes blazed. The room went quiet. No one had expected the farm kid to push back. Ms. Hargrove didn't flinch. She stepped toward him, her heels clicking deliberately, stopping inches away. Her stare was icy. "If you can't handle it, prove yourself. Otherwise, leave. There's no room here for those who don't belong." The words hit like a slap, public and personal. Lucas chuckled softly from the front, savoring the moment. Daniel felt the walls closing in, every gaze piercing him. His dignity was being shredded, but he saw the trap. If he lashed out, they'd call him unruly, unfit. They wanted him to break. He wouldn't. Taking a deep breath, he loosened his fists, packed his books, and walked out, silent, head high. Ms. Hargrove blinked, momentarily thrown, expecting a fight. A few laughs followed him, but they were weaker now. The door slammed shut behind him, and though he didn't look back, the fury on his face was unmistakable. Outside, the morning light streamed through the windows, but it only deepened his sense of isolation. Mrs. Hargrove hadn't just embarrassed him. She'd attacked his roots, his family, his very existence. No one had defended him, and that cut deepest. Inside the classroom, chatter exploded. He's gone for good. What a joke, thinking he could fit in. Lucas leaned back, smug, pathetic, probably crying somewhere. Miss Hargrove said nothing, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. She'd always believed some didn't belong, and if Daniel wouldn't see it, she'd make him. Not everyone laughed, though. A black girl, Naomi Pierce, sat by the window, gripping her pen, guilt gnawing at her silence. A Latino boy, Javier, stared at his desk, ashamed he hadn't spoken up. They knew it was wrong, but fear kept them quiet. The rule was simple: stay silent, stay safe. News of the incident spread fast, through the cafeteria, the gym, the halls. Lucas and his crew embellished it, reveling in Daniel's defeat. But some, like Senior Ryan Holt, felt unease. If it could happen to Daniel, who was next? The real shift came when word reached Daniel's mother, Elise Brooks. Stunned, she didn't call the school. She called her father. Hours later, a black helicopter rose from a ranch outside town, cutting through the dawn sky toward Crestwood Academy. The next morning, as students milled about, a deep rumble shook the football field. The sleek chopper descended, its blades whipping up dust and leaves. Kids shielded their eyes, phones out, whispering excitedly. "Who is that? What's happening?" The door opened, and out stepped Malcolm Brooks, Daniel's grandfather. Tall and commanding in a tailored suit, his presence silenced the crowd. Teachers froze, some recognizing him. Malcolm wasn't just a farmer. He owned an agricultural empire, supplying half the state's organic produce. A titan of industry, he'd risen from nothing, and today he was here for his grandson. Behind him emerged Daniel, no longer bowed by shame, his eyes steady. Whispers buzzed. "That's because of Daniel. Something big's coming." Lucas and his group stood rigid, the smirks gone. They knew who Malcolm was, and for once, Lucas felt a flicker of fear. Malcolm marched to the principal's office, where Principal Garrett and Ms. Hargrove waited, tense. Garrett forced a smile, but Ms. Hargrove's hands twitched. Malcolm didn't waste time. "I hear my grandson was humiliated in class." His voice was calm but ironclad. Ms. Hargrove stammered, "Mr. Brooks, it's a misunderstanding." He cut her off, placing a check on the desk. "Who funded your science wing? Your history program? Who gave hundreds of thousands to this school?" Garrett paled. Ms. Hargrove's lips tightened. Malcolm's gaze bore into her. "So you think you can shame my grandson because he doesn't look like your elite?" Daniel stepped forward, voice firm. "I don't want favors. I want respect, same as anyone." Ms. Hargrove looked away, her control slipping. Malcolm smiled thinly at Garrett. "My family doesn't need pity. Respect isn't about color or class. It's about character, and you'll learn that." The room was suffocatingly still. Ms. Hargrove's face drained of color, her authority crumbling. She'd meant to teach a lesson, but she'd miscalculated. Malcolm's words lashed her. "You mocked him with my money," she faltered. "I didn't mean—" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean what? To make him a laughingstock?" She had no answer. He pressed on. "You think hard work's a lesson for a boy up at dawn, working the land, still showing up here?" Her silence was damning. Garrett, sweating, tried to intervene. "We don't tolerate discrimination." Malcolm's laugh was cold. "Would this be a misunderstanding if I weren't here?" Garrett couldn't reply. Malcolm pointed to the check. "Over $500,000. Not to pull it. I don't need to. I'm here so no kid suffers like Daniel did." Garrett turned to Ms. Hargrove, voice heavy. "We'll review your methods." She bristled but said nothing. Malcolm stood, his point made. The storm he'd unleashed had shifted everything. Days later, change rippled through Crestwood. Daniel walked the halls with new confidence. No longer a target. Lucas avoided him. His bravado faded. Ms. Hargrove taught with less venom, her power diminished, not from remorse, but necessity. At a ceremony, Garrett awarded Daniel a scholarship, praising his grit. As applause filled the auditorium, Daniel spoke. I'm here because I fought for myself. Respect isn't given, it's earned. No one decides your worth but you. Lucas sat, hands clenched, his reign over. Ms. Hargrove apologized hollowly, but Daniel didn't need it. He'd reclaimed his dignity. A university offer followed, and with his grandfather's pride behind him, Daniel knew this was just the start. He'd turned humiliation into triumph, proving respect comes from within and inspiring others to rise too. Crestwood would never be the same.